I got to talking to a really great man called Bryon Morrison, and I'm going to bring him on right now and share with you. He is the co-founder and CEO of Proxy, and his company is the Remote Chief of Staff. That is his website, Remote Chief of Staff, and his company is Proxy. Welcome, Bryon. Thank you for joining me on the show.
Hi, Fanny. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to learn from you and to chat with you. Because, I had a very limited view of Chief of Staff. But before we get into that, please tell our audience a little about your background and a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started several different businesses. Love that. I've got a true passion for the startup phase and for the growth phases that companies go through. And that's what kind of led me to developing Proxy. And also, serve on boards with other companies and consult, teach at SMU.
Adjunct professor.
Spent a number of years in the agency world with Omnicom, as well as my own agency. And it's just been fantastic. I guess if I was going to centralize it all down, it's probably all about digital marketing, teaching, and just design. I love design and I love solving problems. And so those are the three tenets of who I really am.
I love that. And tell me a bit about Proxy. What made you start Proxy, and is there significance to that name? Tell me a bit about the background.
Yeah, we started it because, there were so many different, reasons, but it was kind of funny. We saw a lot of shift and change happening in business and leadership coming up. There's a millennial generation of leadership that's coming up. There's a ton of change and disruption right now. And, I was serving on boards and I'd meet with executives and I'd give them my input and love that process. And then they'd look at me and go, cool idea. I didn't have the hours to do that when I came in here. Much less the hours now.
It's all in the execution, right?
Right. And so ideas are great, but if you don't get anything done, then it's worthless. So it was one of those things where I just kind of stepped back and I started thinking about how could we solve some of the big challenges for leadership in small to medium-sized businesses? And that was so near and dear to me because I've been through it so many times and I love working with those types of companies. And so the other reason I love it is because if you do one thing, the ripple effect is massive. Whereas, when I worked with my friends at PepsiCo or JCPenney or AT&T, that's like throwing a pebble in the ocean. It's hard to see the impact of your work. And so anyway, that's why we just started thinking about what's the best way to serve those leaders and to enable them. And the role of chief of staff just kept coming up. And so we went down that path of kind of re-envisioning what a chief of staff can be and should be. And so that's what started it.
And like I said, really, I don't even really understand or knew about the term chief of staff. I just have the Hollywood version, and it was Leo helping, the president in West Wing, right?
What more could you need?
He just handled things. He just handled things. I want a Leo. I want somebody to handle things. So, but tell me your definition of a chief of staff.
Yeah. It's funny because if you asked 100 people, you'd probably get 100 different answers. But it really comes down to your frame of reference, how you come in contact with a chief of staff. So for you, that might, chief of staff might mean it's a political role and
it's the president's problem solver.
Exactly. And so, you look at Leo and you go, well, that guy's a magician.
Mhm.
He walks into a room and no matter what he's doing on a global scale, he understands as he manages it, he takes care of it.
Yeah.
Then, if you come at it from a military perspective, I've never had to explain what a chief of staff is to anybody who's been in military,
Right.
because it is an instituted role. It's consistent. People understand it. There's much more, it's a much more rigid role just as a byproduct of their training and their processes and their organizational norms.
Right.
And then if you're in Fortune 500, you've probably seen a chief of staff as well. And that is all over the board, in terms of, I refer to this as a spectrum, skill set spectrum
Yeah.
of magicians to technicians. And
Ah.
so on the magician side, you have the Leo McGarrys of the world, and then it becomes more normalized, consistent, and repeatable as you move further to the, technician side of the scale.
Yeah.
And we just believe that, if we focus on a specific segment of business, that being small to medium-sized businesses from typically the size is
Me.
like 15 to 500 people.
Yeah.
So in that, even though every business is terribly unique, there's a tremendous amount of consistency that occurs in the stage of business, the growth stage, the leadership challenges.
Mm.
And so that's how we've been able to create some consistency in how we approach the job. And then the other side of it that I would offer up is I think there's some super common elements, regardless of whether you're working in the White House or you're working for a small business.
Yeah. What would that be?
Yeah, I think that's you're an honest, unbiased confidant for a leader. And that's really, really hard, because most organizations, no matter what role you're in, you're going to have a bias towards what you do.
Yes.
And the chief of staff has no bias except for making that executive that they work for more successful. That should be their only bias.
Well, especially as small business owner, we're lost in our own thoughts and our own, tunnel vision. So
Right.
Yeah, it would benefit to have like an independent kind of view.
Yeah. And then, and that's what allows you to work with your C-suite, and everybody on your team, and you recognize that the chief of staff is there just to enable. The other thing that they do is they provide strategic counsel. And the reason that we feel like a chief of staff is more capable of providing that strategic counsel is because they're in the day-to-day.
Yeah.
They understand every aspect of what you're thinking about as an executive at that time. And then,
but how would that be like different from a consultant then?
Well,
right?
Consultants typically come in to do a job. So there's an initiative, even if it's something big like digital transformation, there are stages and you're focused and you have deep, deep expertise. Whereas the expertise that's applied as a chief of staff is on the executive.
Okay.
So what you're an expert at is helping that individual be successful. And then some of the other elements is you're a process integrator. So you understand process, you understand how to get things done more efficiently. Some people refer to that as the air traffic controller.
Nice.
Yeah. And then communications is an incredibly important skill set because you have to help that executive transfer their vision to the rest of the organization. And then the final piece, I think, is just being a servant leader. Someone who I always joke that it's like having an advisor that's, willing to book your meetings for you.
So let me summarize then, if I understand it correctly. So there's like a whole spectrum of a chief of staff. So at the presidential level, there's always, obviously that. And then at the CEO and enterprise level, there's chief of staff to handle the processes and enabling systems. And then you're saying there's also this side of the small and medium-sized businesses that could also benefit from a chief of staff. Because in my head, it's just like chief of staff is something for like big organizations and only they can afford it. And that's it, right? But you're saying in this niche that you've kind of carved out, it's for small and medium-sized businesses.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But how is that different than like a admin assistant or an executive assistant?
So see, that's interesting because almost everybody says, so how's that different than an administrative assistant? Or they say, how's that different than a coach or a consultant?
Yeah.
And I think it just comes back to that spectrum, right? If you're used to working at things from a strategic position we would compare against a consultant. And again, I think the difference between a chief of staff and a consultant is access.
Yeah.
Like you're serving that individual and you're in email and calendar and like you really know what's going on with that individual. Whereas a consultant is focused on a specific business objective.
More advisory and strategy. Right. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
But a virtual assistant or an admin, they are there to do what you ask them to do. So I think that's that's for sure. And by the way, I have had some amazing admins in the past. And that's really one of the things that inspired me to do this, because I want everybody to have that same kind of support. Once you get it, and once you realize how much better you are when you have it, you'll never go back. So that's the big focus on what an admin does. But the difference is the chief of staff is a person that's there to share what they see needs to be done. Then make sure it gets managed to close and to your expectations. Yeah. So instead of you managing someone and telling them what you want done, the chief of staff sees that. And
so they're kind of like the implementer, right? I always say like it's one thing to know what to do. It's one thing to know I need to get it done, but it's a totally other thing to execute on it and to implement it, to implement the plan.
Yeah, a friend of mine that was a chief of staff at AT&T said that chief of staff and admins are both enablers. Yeah. But the ability to enable without being managed is the big difference. It's not a resource I have to tell, hey, go do this. Right. The chief of staff sees it ahead of time.
Now you mentioned something earlier just about your values around servant leadership. Right. And I'm a big proponent of that. What does that mean to you, servant leadership?
That's why we get along so well.
We've got to serve, right?
Yeah.
Create value.
Everybody in Proxy we're a sucker for seeing other people succeed. It's just an incredible feeling. Everybody in the organization has mentored, taught, coached, cared, for somebody else's success. So that's part one, and part two is no ego. We have a friend of mine said, I love this quote. He goes, my Proxy chief of staff is such a high-powered, executive, and they're so awesome. I feel weird asking them to order lunch for a meeting, but he said, but then what I realized is I never have to ask. Yeah, it just gets done. Oh, and that's the difference.
Where's my Leo? I need a Leo. And then actually I see Molly Walsh in our comments in our audience right now. And I met you because of Molly.
Yes. She's the best kind of enabler.
Molly, she is. Molly, shout out to Molly. For those of you, she will help you get things done. And she was working at Venture X, and I ended up, working out of there for a while, and so do you, right? And and we just got to talking, and I think I love that spirit of community, like similar to what you're talking about, servant leadership, right? That sharing of ideas, and we just got to talking about a whole variety of things from like SAP all the way to technology to marketing, branding, and here we are talking about chief of staff. So I think that's great. I always kind of encourage people to build community and collaborate and connect. You just never know who you're going to end up talking to and where that relationship will end up. Like here.
I agree. Yeah.
And we got Pam joining in from New Mexico. Philip Burns, integrator. Oh, yes, he was talking about it's the integrator of executive and organizational priorities and agenda. Yes, just like what you were saying.
Yeah, Philip runs the Chief of Staff Roundtable group
Ah,
on LinkedIn. He's fantastic.
awesome. Glad you can join us, Philip.
I was also going to say, if anybody's
Mm-hmm.
interested in a specific, if they want to read more on Chief of Staff and really kind of understand that role,
Yes.
there's a book called Chief of Staff.
Okay.
The Strategic Partner Who Will Revolutionize Your Organization, and it's by Tyler Parris.
Okay, let me type that out for folks. It's called
yeah.
The Chief of Staff?
It's called Chief of Staff, and it's by Tyler Parris. Parris.
Tylar?
Look at
Oh,
this.
there we go.
I have it, actually. There you go.
Tyler Parris. There you go.
Yeah, it's good historical view on the role, and that was incredibly helpful for us. We went through that and talked to a lot of people before we kind of re-envisioned the model.
So at this point, you obviously deal with a lot of leaders, CEOs, business owners of SMBs. What are the top 3 challenges you're seeing right now that they're facing?
Top 3 challenges.
Top 3 problems that they're coming to you with.
Right. Yeah, I think the first one is pretty consistent. It's time. Like I just need more time. Right?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's everybody, right? So, which is why that's the first thing we focus on is how do we make you more efficient? And so on average, we save, it's actually 8.2 hours per week is what we give back to you. And, that's a core tenet for us because time is so important that that's why we don't have long-term contracts. We go week to week because each week we give you exactly what the value was that we created in the last week. And that's just central to who we are. So I'd say time is the first thing.
Yeah.
The second one, I always refer to it as the whiteboard list. Anybody that walked into my office,
or little Post-it notes, just.
Oh yeah. I could have done that too, right?
I have Post-it notes everywhere, all over my computer of things I need to do.
So people come to us with I've got this idea, which is why our tagline is letting leaders lead. Because a lot of individuals, they know what they want to do. They just can't get it to a point of operationalizing it. And so, it's time, it's the whiteboard list. And then the other one, the third one I would say is it's a little more amorphous because people say I want to up my game or I can't scale at the right level. And in that situation, we really look at that as discipline. What the Chief of Staff brings is a certain discipline and rhythm to a company through a business operating system. We'll plug in solutions like that. And that's the 3 biggest things, though, is time, let me execute my strategic plans and give me a way to manage it more effectively.
I would love to hear from the audience. Let me know in the comments below what your top challenge is. Is it trying to get more time out of the day? Is it, prioritization, basically, that whiteboard? Do you have a massive whiteboard of to-do? And then also, the final one of just scaling, right? And getting bigger, how to up your game, right? So I'd love to hear from the audience, where are your challenges right now? And we're going to bring that up later and then talk a lot more about that. So while we wait for the audience to let us know, can you give me an example of maybe a case study of what you've done in the past for a certain CEO or business owner and how you were able to kind of turn them around or this process of having a chief of staff, how does that turn the process around?
Yeah, I mean, from a fundamental methodology approach, what we do is we first save time, take care of the tyranny of the urgent, and then once you give somebody back time, that frees their mind to be able to think about what else can I do. And By the way, my partner somewhere in the world is singing En Vogue, Free Your Mind, just because I said that. I'm making
Now
fun
that's
of
in my head. Yeah.
Yeah,
We're dating
yeah.
ourselves, Bryon.
I just know that's happening right now. So then we look at like solutions that will allow us to continue that savings. So that might be technology, that might be a business operating system, like I was talking about. But that's what
Can you give
ensures
me
that
like an example maybe of one of your past clients or
yeah, yeah,
how
and
that went about?
so that's why I was going to say the third piece of
Mm,
strategy. That's
mm,
when we get to that point, like one organization that we were working with, they were growing so quickly
yeah.
that they got to a point where they were establishing silos because everybody was working on client work. And so what we actually looked at is like, the culture was starting to separate. And
Mm.
so we introduced in that situation, the solution was to put in special interest groups in the organization, or
Oh,
it was a SIG model.
yeah.
So that way someone could self-select, hey, I'm interested in working on cultural things that we're doing in the agency, or I'm interested in marketing or technology or
Mm.
whatever that might be. And so it allowed them to follow their passions, learn new things, cross-pollinate ideas.
Oh,
So that's an
I like
idea.
that. It's very
That was,
empowering too.
yeah, it was great for the culture. So that's one example. Right now we're doing quite a bit with, everybody is talking about coming back to the office, right?
Yeah.
So there's this reentry process that is really concerning to people. And so we're actually putting together events that
Mm.
are safe events that allow people to come together and remember what the benefit of an office is that kind of visceral, connected collaboration.
Huh.
And so we're going to have an event that is, I can't share it on here, but if anybody's
Sure.
interested in it, just say reentry,
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
comment, and I'll send you the example of what we're doing because it's a surprise for one of the companies we're working on.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's
Yes.
fun. Yeah.
Now, I have an
Sure.
interesting question from Joel. He says, how would you pitch to a CEO to create this chief of staff position? Because that's not a normal role that automatically comes up, right? I would think sometimes justification has to be made for it. Is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what's really interesting is you could look at other companies and find out if they have chiefs of staff. That's what you're starting to see is this is a very, very hot role and rec, that people are looking at. So the first thing I would look at is, does it exist in your space? Will people understand it? And then if I were to pitch that to them, I would probably, I'd look at it as, how much time could you use back? And I would then say, you see all these things on the whiteboard that haven't been done? Why don't we just attack those and let me lead that for you and help you prioritize them?
Wow.
And then let me put tools in place to be able to make sure that the entire organization knows how it's going to get rolled out, and I'll just take care of that. So that I would literally follow the same model.
That's like candy to me as a child. Like
I know.
Let me take care of that.
I know.
These
lists. I'm teasing you, aren't I? Look, it's so simple. No, but I do think you need to just think about like what's their challenge, And I think Joel brings up a really good point that sometimes there's ego involved in it. Mm. And that's actually why we start behind the scenes. Mm. We work with executives behind the scenes so that no one knows, there is no risk, and you and I can start to get to know each other.
Got it.
And then you can decide whether or not you want to introduce us or you just want to do it behind the scenes. Pam
Galley said, in answer to our question, prioritization. That's her challenge. Staying focused on what really needs to be done. Oh, so true. So true. We have Clint, prioritization as well, but I'd love to have less free time. Clint.
So I love
your content. Shout out to Clint. If you want good laughs and valuable information, follow Clint Reese. I love his content.
Yeah, when you were asking about stuff that the chief of staff does,
Yeah.
one of the things that we did was one client, was really concerned during this quarantine period about mental well-being. And they wanted to, make sure that they were helping people through that process. And we actually brought Clint in.
Oh, wow.
And he was just fantastic because, it just, it gave them that understanding of like, how can I start to cope with this? How do I deal with it? And it was awesome.
Oh, love it. And Small, she says right now, the biggest challenge for her is helping people that are afraid to move forward due to uncertainty. Yes, as leaders, we have to keep moving forward and adapt to change. Suggestions on people that are paralyzed with fear. That's a really great question, Anne. Thank you. Your thoughts on that, Bryon?
Yeah, I think those are probably organizations that have not stepped into that whole agile mindset and failing fast. I did a ton of writing on this concept of a challenger executive. And, there's a segment of business that, like she said, Anne said, they're curled up in the fetal position.
Yeah.
And they're waiting, or they're analyzing everything to the point that, they're waiting for the perfect answer in a world that has imperfect data. We don't have that content.
Say that again. Say that again, Bryon.
They're looking for the perfect answer in a world where we have imperfect data.
Yes.
And so you have to start to test and learn and keep moving through that process. So that's why I'm a huge fan of just the agile mindset. And I think that's what I would recommend, is saying, instead of trying to solve the entire problem that's in your mind, let's break up pieces of it and see what works and keep moving.
Love that. Yes. And then Wendy says, I guess to add to the list of chief of staff, I agree with everything that Bryon shared. I would add trusted advisor to the list too. Yes. I would read the room, explore diverse solutions and proposals, as well as align stakeholders to support his strategy. Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate that. Yeah. So, switching gears just a little bit, just for those in the audience that are struggling with a variety of those things, you and I got into some conversations about just some of your favorite project management and organization tools that we could use, right?
Yeah.
Can you share some of those and, some of the benefits of them in the meantime?
I'm happy to.
Before we get that justification to hire the chief of staff?
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of it just depends on the scale of an organization, right?
Yeah.
It's that classic, get the right tool for the right job. So, we use lots and lots of different technologies and different methodologies, but my answer is always really simple. You should use exactly what will work for your organization and what people will consistently use. So, the solution I come up with for somebody that has 25 people is wildly different than somebody that has 500. Yeah. But like as an example, for some companies that don't have a really good methodology for planning their objectives, strategies, and tactics that they're going to do at the C-suite level, we start with an Excel spreadsheet. We start with, we call it a 3x3. And so it's just, what are the 3 objectives you're going to do, the three strategies related to that objective, and the tactics to each one of those strategies. It's just to gain mindset and to get people on the same page. Now, in organizations that have already kind of moved into that agile mindset we were talking about, these are the people, this is like you. You've got a wall of Post-it notes.
Yes.
So your ability to move to a Kanban board is going to be no problem.
Tell me about that. I've heard that term, but I really don't know what it is.
You ever walk into an organization and they'll have one big whiteboard that says, stuff to do, this week's projects, who's reviewing it, and like they'll marker, their marker across the board. Yeah. That's essentially all it is. So a Kanban board is a series of buckets that you can then just move cards through. And so it allows you to create a backlog of every idea that you have. And while you're thinking about, you're the entrepreneur's mind, we have our ADD and we're flying all over.
100 ideas all in our heads floating around.
So that's where that agile mindset really helps. because you just create a card for it, and you put it in the backlog, and then you stay focused for 2 weeks.
That's
or
like
3
that
weeks.
software Trello then, right?
That's
I've used
exactly
Trello
what
before.
that is. So Trello that's a free solution
I
that
love
anybody
Trello.
could use. It's great.
It's so visual. Like I'm a visual person. So then, so that's Kanban.
Yeah, that's what a Kanban board is. And Jira is another one that you'll hear used.
Okay.
But
how do you spell Jira?
Jira.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But those are great to use. And then once you get into larger organizations, you want to start thinking about like initiative tracking, like how am I keeping track of, projects I'm working on? Lattice is great for that. ClickUp is great for that. On a larger scale where you're really talking about business navigation and dashboards, right here in Dallas, there's a company called Result Maps. They're more focused towards EOS, the Entrepreneur's Operating System, but really it works for anything. There's an organization in Austin called Chorus. Yeah, like a chorus of a song, but it's with a K. And they have similar type software. And right now that's actually free. So anybody out there that wants to go through kind of that mindset, that's from Joel Trammell. He's the author of the CEO Tightrope. And love his work. And, he did a great job of just providing a tool for, I think they really fit the SMB market really well.
Awesome.
I would highly recommend any of those. Yeah.
There you go. I've typed it out. So for those of you out there looking for a variety of tools, but again, to Bryan's point, you got to find what works for you, right? And you could have 100 tools, but find what works for you and adopt that, right? So let's drill down into some of those challenges that you mentioned, right? Like the 3, right? The first one being how to save time. For the SMB leader, for the business owner, what's your advice to help them save time?
Well, so that's what we refer to as like productivity or efficiency work. And so I'll tell you, there's a great article out there by Harvard Business Review, HBR, and it just came out this year. Was productivity skills to help you gain time back.
I'll pull that out.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a little self-serving because when I read it, I thought, man, I got to hire a chief of staff to implement this, but so I'm not trying to, but it really does give some great advice. Like the first thing it brings up is automate, right? There's so many things. And that's one of the first things we do is we come in and look at like, where could I use plugins, apps, Zapier, how can I plug these things in?
I finally implemented Calendly. And just to automate the scheduling of my appointments and have someone else sign up. Yeah.
And some people, if that's something you're comfortable with, and that's a fantastic solution. Some people don't like the idea of putting the onus on other people. So it's all whatever you want to do. But there's a lot of tools out there like that. So that's the first thing. The second one is outsourcing, which is totally, that is self-serving. No question about that. But
I outsource video editing. It got to be too much. Yes.
Exactly. And so that's what I would recommend everybody check out. If you go to our website, we have an ROI calculator on that. And that's the mindset, right? When you get to a point where you are saying, for every $1 I'm spending on somebody helping me, I'm getting a 300% return. Then you figure out whether or not outsourcing makes sense. So
I love this table too. Is your work worth $10 an hour or $10,000 an hour?
Right.
And then how it breaks down.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to read this in more detail. Yeah.
No, it's really good. But if you go to our site, you'll be able to just do that with sliders. And we built all that in.
Okay.
So that people could see it. And then it gives other advice like asynchronous communications, which is basically like, how do you get more effective with your meetings and your communication channels, which is, central to finding efficiency.
These sliders, is that what you're
Oh
talking
yeah,
about?
yeah, that's for the ROI. Yeah, that's our ROI calculator.
I love this. What
It's
great web
fun.
design. Web designer is like loving
Yay.
that.
Let's
So
hear it for
interactive.
Logan Spates. Yeah, but what else was on that list? I think it was communications. No, it's okay. The other one was stop treating all decisions like a big decision, and that's vital. When you start thinking about staging your decisions, they talk about Jeff Bezos and type 1, type 2 decisions. So that's something that we always focus on, is how do we start helping a CEO understand this is mission critical, and this is something that we can stage and think about when we have the time to do that. And
sorry, just to pause, and I still remember an article you shared around that about like a key quality to leadership is being able to make quick decisions. Talk a bit more about that, because I think that's so true.
Yeah, that was from
with like analysis paralysis, right? Like
yeah.
I get in my head and then I'm like, I need to make this decision quick, but then I just start trying to analyze it too much. What's your advice?
You gave me a hard time about that because I admitted to you that I'm a freak about the LinkedIn algorithm. I just want to break that. I want to figure it out. And you were like, you do know you could create 100 more pieces of content if you just stop thinking about that. And that was fair advice. But it's an illness and I can't do anything about it.
Get into analysis paralysis about things that we're not certain about.
Yeah.
So we don't have that experience to draw back on. If it's a new area or an area we're not familiar with, I think that's where that comes in. And any advice around better decision making or faster decision making?
Yeah, I think the main thing I think about is how do I get systems to provide me the best data possible? And then after that, Pareto principle, right? I mean, 80-20. I don't expect perfection. I can't. But there are some things that data is very clean, it's available, and it can be routinized. If it can be, I've already automated it and I have that information pushed to me at all times. Yeah. If I don't and I can't get to that, then I have my team would help me get to the best possible data, and then that's where you have to start making decisions. If I fail fast, will it be something irreparable harm? Will there be irreparable harm? And I think that's the biggest thing is most of the time you'll find it's not going to be that bad. As long as you're learning along the way, you can have a lot of failure, and that's okay because you learn every time. We're very, very lucky in the fact that we've never lost a client. But that's not the goal. We know that someday we will, and we will learn from that, and that's okay.
That ties back to, at the end of the day, it's just being a great servant leader and continue to work with the clients and collaborate. Yeah. Was there another one? Oh, and then what's
task bundling?
Tell me about that.
Man, I'll tell you, I don't know about you, but if you're an executive and you say, okay, I've got to write something out, or I have to do a big think piece, I have to put some thought into something, and then you have in the background your email going ding, ding, ding. It is so hard to keep your mind in that strategic zone versus the tactical zone. And so thinking about how you can bundle tasks that are of the same mindset.
Got it.
Is a great move. And one of the primary things we look at is, how do you keep, if I've got 5 things to do and those are all heavy thinking pieces, I'm going to put those together because my mind will already be in that mode.
Right.
And it's one thing to bounce back and forth between two strategic things I'm working on. That's my ADD. That's good. But if I'm going from a low level task to something that's very strategic, I can't bounce back and forth like that.
That's a good point. Yeah, because I was recently part of a accountability group. Shout out to Jake Jordan out there, and through it, I actually learned to allocate all my thinking and development and research time to the mornings when I have a clearer head, and then all my meetings, sales conversations, coaching conversations to the afternoon, because that part comes naturally to me. I love talking to people, so I didn't need to be like that focused because it just comes naturally. So I've actually split up my day so that like research, analysis, thinking, development is in the mornings, and then collaborations, meetings, sales is in the afternoon.
It's really smart.
Yeah. Otherwise, I was going a little nutty trying to move from hour to hour to like left side of the brain to right side of the brain.
Well, and part of it's also understanding yourself, and how you really work. So one of the things we've instituted is like the PI index, where you go through and it identifies how you actually flow through your day and where you have energy and where you do not have energy. And so, I actually had one employee that we always missed each other in the afternoon. I was like, I don't understand why we can't communicate. And we actually ran that test, and I'm the exact same person at 6 a.m. or 3 a.m. or 4 p.m. I mean, it's the exact same. Hers was high energy in the morning and then dipped. And so we just scheduled around that. We understood, I mean, how do you play to each person's strength?
Having that self-awareness.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, another thing we talked about, and I think we saw a lot of that in the comments, is the struggle with prioritization, right? Yeah. What's your advice and tips around prioritizing for leaders?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I know we had talked about that and we talked about scale. Yeah. And I think those are somewhat intertwined. For some organizations, the biggest factor that we see is we look at the industry, we look at the experience of the leader and the leadership team. We look at several variables, but the primary variable we look at, rate of growth. And then we look at stage of growth. And stage of growth is one of those things that, like, if you're a 25-person company, you're a completely different company than you were when you were 10 people. And I know that sounds crazy, but you probably experienced that if you're, I mean, I was always taught the rule is you're in a different company when you go from 1 to 2 people, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 25, and then 50 and every 100 after that. And that's always actually been pretty consistent with what, I've seen. It's a little oversimplified, but prioritizing what I should be focused on, a lot of it has something to do with my scale and my size. And am I on one of those cusps where I'm preparing to move from 25 people to 30 people? Then what do I build for? If I'm growing at such a speed that, it's really moving quickly, do I plan for 50? Because I'm going to be there in such a short period of time. So the initiative would take so long that I should just simplify it and I should go right after the 50 because I'm rolling right into it anyway. So that's kind of how we prioritize those big initiatives. And then, if you want to really simplify things, prioritize around your clients. Prioritize around your just focus on your clients and focus on your staff. And that's a pretty doggone good place to start.
Yeah. Even at I'd say I guess my micro level, like I went from being a solopreneur to I now have 4 part-time people helping me across a variety of different tasks. And now I'm realizing I need to allocate a whole day or part of a day just to meet with them weekly to have them help me with the variety of tasks that I have. And I mean, as a solopreneur, I just managed my own time. I didn't have to worry about planning and thinking in my head of what those 4 people are going to be doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that in itself was a new way that I had to learn to work.
Yeah. So in that example, you go back to that Kanban board, right? You just use Trello, and then you go, okay, now I see, I have visibility to it. That's usually the biggest issue, is just, do I have visibility to what's going on?
Right. Now, tell me a bit more about, you mentioned like these different phases of, and by the way, for anyone that has any comments for Bryon, please drop it in the comments. And, or sorry, for anybody that has questions for Bryon, please drop it in the comments and I'll bring them up and we'll discuss them. But in the meantime, you mentioned the different phases of growth of a company. What do you see kind of as the different phases that a company goes through outside of number of employees and things like that? Where do you see kind of like the patterns?
Yeah, I would say, like I said, I think the biggest issue actually is the size of the company. And because most systems are built for certain sized organizations. But what I think is interesting is when companies are smaller, and it's not to say that bigger companies don't have the same issues or concerns, but when companies are smaller, there's a great galvanizing factor around establishing your vision. And that's what I love about, like, EOS refers to that as the VTO, but it's basically, how am I going to figure out what really matters to my organization? What are our values and what do we care about? And how are we going to make sure that we make that available? And what's our plan in 1 year, 3 years, and 10 years? Yeah. So a simple thing like that is what kind of sets you up for scale in the early stage. And if you haven't gone through that kind of, vision planning and vision casting process, I would recommend that to anyone. But for sure, if you're a small company, go through that process, get that established, and that'll prepare you for what you think you're going to be doing, in some of those stages. Once you get up into the 25 to 50 to 100, then I personally think it's all about systems and communications. So how do I establish the consistency of message that lets everybody understand what leadership believes, and how are we executing against that? And how am I aware of what's happening? So that becomes more and more important the larger the organization is, because you can't do that water cooler chat. And we can't do that anyway, which is why you hear everybody trumpeting right now, it's all about communication. And that's true. Right now, what we're going through in quarantine, it's a requirement to have, leadership telling us what we believe and how we can help and what we care about.
Communications.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, time flies when you're having fun. Let us know in the comments below any questions you have for Bryon. And this conversation is so important, I think, for all our growth, whether we're even corporate professionals. I think a lot of things that you mentioned really appeal to corporate professionals as well, and how departments can grow, and how managers can grow, and directors can grow, and all the way up. But one topic that I'm super passionate about is brand and content creation, right? Yeah. And I know you came from the marketing realm. So why do you think brand is important in content creation? I'm always trying to encourage my audience member to create content and to create videos. But from your perspective and, from all your years of experience, what's your advice around that?
Yeah, I think that comes back to definition of brand, right? How do you define brand? Personally, I define brand as an organization's actions and their offerings. So everything is brand. So if you're asking me how important it is, I think it's the only thing that matters. The idea of me telling you, hey, I make a great car, go buy my car. If you buy it and that offering is not good, that advertising was wasted. So your brand is actually the experience that you have. It's the offering. And the same thing for your actions. If you say, hey, I'm a friendly brand and you're going to enjoy dealing with me, and somebody comes into contact with you and you're curt with them, you're not a friendly brand. You're that person, so that's really, I think it's the last mile, that really matters. And in terms of content, no one understands that brand unless you tell them. So I think the content is the most important part, because instead of saying to everybody, this is what my brand is, this is what I mean, that's what you do in 30-second spots. That's what you do in your tagline. Those are constants. But how do you start to make the brand more like an individual, where there's lots of layers to them and it's interesting, but it all seems in sync? That's what has to happen from a content strategy perspective. It allows the brand to breathe.
I love that. Thank you. We have a question from Philip Burns about, how do you create systems with a bent towards innovation? So not just stability or maintenance. Oh,
yeah,
question.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think that is less about systems and more about the planning processes of the organization. So, the piece I was talking about from an agile perspective, if you've got that mindset, you're going to be thinking around, longer term considerations, epics, large scale strategy. So that's always helpful. And then I'm going to come back to it, but there's a great book I was just going to, just escaped me. Shoot, keep going. Give me another question. I'll come back to it.
I just want to acknowledge some of the comments from the audience. Anne, brand is everything. I don't know if everyone realizes that, so she totally agrees with you. Bridget said exactly, #CRM. And then just going back to earlier, for those of you, quick shout out. Tony's one of your co-founders, right?
He is. He's singing right now. He's singing Free Your Mind. I know he is.
Oh, I'd like to see that. I think you and your two co-founders should do a little talk about content.
Or not. Maybe Tony should. Tony will be great at it.
The three of you. I'm imagining the three of you singing Free Your Mind on Vogue.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Hey, I was going to mention that book.
Please.
This is great for anybody who has a mindset around disruption and how do I innovate and be consistent. There's a company called there's a book called Embracing Irrationality by Ben Gaddis. And I think that is an exceptional book, especially for what's going on right now. I actually wrote about it in the Challenger Executive, because you have to be able to still see long-term, but be able to embrace change, and you can't get to disruption unless you're thinking very, very in a very innovative way. And he gives a formula for it. So that's what I would recommend you check out. Thank
you. And so, Bryon, my hours always fly by. And I so appreciate you giving all this great advice to my audience, sharing about, I think at the end of the day, brand is, or time is probably our most precious commodity, right? And because if we can have more time, even away from work, we can have more time with family, with friends, enjoying life, because why else do we work this hard, right? Right. And so if we can save some time and enjoy our work more, enjoy the tasks that we enjoy doing more, and spend more time with our loved ones, then that's a beautiful life.
Yeah, that's great. I agree.
Bryon, I always kind of finish off with a guest, and I'm going to ask you the same question. What are you grateful for?
Oh, my list is far too long, but first and foremost, I always put my family first. I'm just so grateful that it's actually, this is such a strange time because I know the incredible pain that people are going through. There's a lot of people who this is literally life and death. And
Yes.
it's interesting to me because this last 3 months has really been exceptional because I've gotten to spend more time with my family. And that's what I think a lot of people are starting to recognize, is that this work from home thing is pretty good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for those of you out there, please connect with Bryon Morrison. I will bring up his profile one more time. You can find him on LinkedIn and also at remotechiefofstaff.com. And we can certainly carry on conversations and questions that you may have with Bryon offline. And what's the best way to reach you?
Boy, I'm pretty easy. I mean, you can reach me at bryon.morrison@yourchiefofstaff.com, or you can, LinkedIn is always the easiest. I welcome it. A lot of people are like, oh, I can't stand getting, messaged on LinkedIn. It's fine. It's fine. Connect with me and let's figure out how we can help each other. That's what it's all about.
Awesome. Thank you. And so thank you for joining me, Bryon, and thank you for your precious time. And thank you for sharing all the tips and advice and insights. And for those of you out there, I did want to give a shout out to my guests next week. Please tune in next Thursday at 4 p.m. Central. I will be featuring Elizabeth Westbrook, which is a great connection of mine that I met at a virtual conference. And we're going to talk all about the importance of connection and engagement, especially on LinkedIn. And a reminder to everyone out there, shine your light, share your gifts, and share yourself with the world through video. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you.